Hello and welcome. I'm Vijay Srinivas, and this is the federal special discussion on Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's budget speech. No big ticket announcement this time. A budget, more of a fill in the blanks budget is what Twitter artists are calling right now. But still, nevertheless, quite a historic budget for Nirmala Sitharaman because she's delivering her record ninth consecutive budget. So, and no other finance minister in India has ever been able to do this. So, joining us to decode the budget speech and what the prime minister has earlier called it a reforms express. Is it really a reforms express? Reforms express. We are joined by a panel of experts. Let me quickly welcome each one of them. Ms. Vidya Mahambare, professor of Great Lakes, and Mr. T.K. Arun, columnist and economist. Mr. Jay Asundi of C-STEP, who's the executive director there of a climate think tank, and our very own editor-in-chief, S. Srinivasan, and Mr. Kaliyarsan Arumugam, who's the economist and professor at Madras Institute of Development Studies, and Mr. Biswajit Dar, who's also the trade economist there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin with TK Arun Surface. I'd like to get each one of your opinions on how do you see budget 2026. Firstly, let's start with TK Arun. You're on mute, sir. Sorry.
I was quite disappointed with the budget. This is not just any other year. We are being presented with very serious geopolitical challenges, technological challenges in the form of the AI disruption. We are being asked to confront a world in which our traditional support we had assumed would be available from the United States might not be available in case of any difficulty with China. We are presented with very advanced weapons capability, AI capability, a unified command with rocket forces, cyber forces, and a unified command of air, ground, and naval forces with China, who also can use now Pakistan as a force multiplier in case they want to do any damage to India. In the face of such a challenge, I would have thought that this budget would take a concerted effort to substantially gear up India's defense preparedness. While we hear big talk, I don't see that being reflected in the political courage that is required to reorient the budget towards creating the savings required to spend extra on the strategic preparedness. Now, the budget size has come down from 14% of GDP in 2024-25 and 13.9% of GDP in 25-26 to a proposed 13.6% of GDP. You are compressing overall expenditure at a time when the growth momentum in the economy is weak. I would have thought the sensible thing to do is to actually at least have 15% of GDP as the budget size. That hasn't happened. Instead, they have gone for fiscal correction further. I don't think this was a particularly prudent move. Secondly, what was required was for the central government to refocus its spending priorities in the areas of responsibility assigned by the constitution to the center. Instead, it has gone and splurged money on various schemes which rightfully are the state's responsibility, state subjects. Now, this certainly does give the government political mileage at the center, and the ruling party at the center political mileage. But is this what this country requires at a time of grave strategic challenge? Shouldn't we actually be consolidating more funds with the center instead of frittering it away on various little schemes across the economy in different states? So this is a third criticism. And further, when it comes to import duties, again, we are persisting with this item by item discretionary rates instead of trying to create a uniform import duty structure, which will help you eliminate differences in effective rates of protection and eliminate the scope for any kind of rent seeking by people who want special favors. However, to the extent that rates have come down, that is welcome. Various import duties have come down, that is welcome. But ideally, we should have been moving towards bands and compressing all rates into narrow bands and bringing the bands down as had been tried during the time of Yashwanthana in the late 1990s. So overall, I'm quite disappointed with the budget.
All right, all right. So let me bring in Professor Vidya Mahambari, who was also a panelist in our pre-budget panel discussion. We had our own wish list of sorts for Madam Finance Minister there. The market seems to in a way disappointed. The Nifty has fallen by about 300 points, Sensex by about 1,000 points. Professor Mahambri, how do you see the budget? You find it disappointing, or you think there's lots of things that got to be still spoken about?
My one major takeaway from the budget, as I see it right now, is a clear move towards services. Even though they've announced several things for manufacturing and some consolidation in terms of reforms, but I think lot more has been announced for the service sector. There is a lot of emphasis on tourism, medical tourism, health services, education cities, GCCs, we have cloud services, tax exemption up to long period of time, city economic regions. So I think it is implicit, how to say, a move forward from the manufacturing towards services. Though of course we have to focus both on manufacturing and services. But nonetheless, compared to the previous budgets, the thrust is much more on the services, acknowledging that Indian youth have got more educated and we need to move towards services. That will be the one big takeaway. Of course, there is a lot of tinkering of indirect taxes, no big customs duty rationalization, defense expenditure composition of, I think it has increased defense expenditure, but the composition of expenditure is not yet clear. STC and all that has increased, which market wasn't expecting. So, that's the immediate reaction. But I think it's a move towards services for me.
All right. Okay. So let me bring in, economist Mr. Kalayarusan there now. Professor Kalayarusan, the budget 2026 seems to have offered a thumbs up to macro stability in a way, because the budget is sticking to its fiscal consolidation path and so on, even amid global headwinds, right? But for India to get that much needed prosperity, it needs something beyond that. The economic survey was also explicit about that. Chief Economic Advisor Anant Nageshwar also spoken about this in the press conference. There are certain structural challenges that got to be addressed, which is building manufacturing and export competitiveness at scale. You think the budget 2026 has addressed these concerns?
Thanks, Vijay, for having me here. I think I would say three takeaways. One, with respect to macro stability. As Anand Nageshwaran mentioned in his report, it's 700-page report. I would say it's one of the, I've been recent time, it's a very objective report of the current economy. And I think that the budget is not in sync with the expectation that is being made in the diagnosis of economic survey. What I mean by that? First one, with respect to macro stability, of course, India's growth figures are good, 7.4%, and the inflation rate is low, and therefore we expect that things are. But if with respect to one aspect, which is I would say external vulnerability, that clearly mentioned in the budget with respect to capital outflow, because the kind of foreign reserve that we have saved for so far is not from any manufacturing mercantile trade surplus. It is not really. It's from the soft kind of vulnerable capital inflow surplus that we've created for the Federal Reserve. So, which is in contrast to what China has been doing for a long time. So, which is really, really vulnerable given the geopolitical disruption that Dr. Arun mentioned, that given the global instability, the change in the fast changing the world order, we cannot be subject to that kind of vulnerability of the capital flow, and through that the kind of reserve, that foreign reserve that we accumulate. I think we need to rethink our external strategy. I think clearly that is well articulated in the economic survey, but I'm not able to find a corresponding addressing mechanism or the resolutions to that questions within the budget. But the budget nonetheless mentioned that it's going to focus more on, despite what Dr. Vidya mentioned of surveys, but it's also mentioned that it's going to focus more on the labor intensive. It's more on the manufacturing, MSMEs. There is a clear mention of that, but I don't know what's the pathways of that, how is that going to be implemented. But I clearly see, in contrast to what Professor Vidya mentioned, but reading the economic survey and looking at the budget, I clearly say there is some kind of break from the India strategy towards particularly of the export, that India is actually trying to focus more on export-driven sector. That's what the claim is, but we don't know the actual numbers and actual allocations is that's from moving from service export to the kind of, because we can't afford to anyway, because the service export destination largely been the US. Given the uncertainty there, and given the US deal, the European deals now, that the few days before we saw that the
Yeah,
huge deal with
UFTA, that's right. Yeah.
and which is actually more of pushing the mercantile trade exports, the goods export. So in that sense, I think we need to connect the dots and see, is there any net focus on the manufacturing, particularly of the MSME labor intensive, because that is also, I guess, is linked that what the budget mentioned clearly on the woman question, particularly of the Nari Shakti, that budget mentions that we're going to enhance the female work participation, which is one of the lowest in the world. I mean, we know that, and I think the link is that, but I'm still not sure what are the pathways of that manufacturing should take place. Third one, the final one is, again, we need to actually be spending time on it to see. See, I mean, the budget clearly mentions of the certain things of making based on the economic survey, that cheapening the cost of capital, particularly of the capital source, or make the capital more available and cheapen that. That's what also the economic survey mentioned, and I see some indication in the budget. But there again, right, India's manufacturing is not simply constrained by capital shortage. Actually, India's manufacturing, India's ecosystem is constrained by multiple other structural factors. It is not really of the lack of capital. We know, for instance, our private capital, many of the corporates having surplus cash with that. They're not investing. And why they're not investing is not simply problem of the some structural, some bottlenecks of the supply constraint. I think it is more of the demand, and the demand constraint as we have to think a little more detail as to why the private investors are not coming forward. It's something that we need to pay attention to. I think we haven't paid attention to it, because it's not simply of the cost of capital, which is contradictory. When while one level you are actually cheapening the cost of capital, another level you are thinking of increasing the labor intensive. So which is actually, it's not really thinking. I think the problem for the private sector not picking up is something else. I think we need to deeply think about it. I think these are the three takeaways I would think from the budget. Yeah.
All right. So let me bring in Srinivasan sir here, and before we get into the sector specific discussions and all that. So I think one of the very important announcement was the finance ministry's acceptance, the government's acceptance of the 16th Finance Commission's report there. In line with the federal's reportage, which is the exclusive reportage, came a couple of days back. I think I'm asking you this, sir. The government has agreed to keep the vertical tax devolution at 41% for the states. This is on the backdrop of the state government's fiscal deficit, which have risen over the last few years from 2.7% of GDP in FY23 to 3.2% in FY25. Out of only 11 states out of 19 had reported a revenue surplus in FY25. And there's also been expectation of fiscal deficit to surge for states, and revenue deficit also widened to 0.9% FY26 from 0.1% FY19. And this is all happening in the backdrop of slowdown in revenue growth, both in terms of tax and in terms of grants as well. So how do you see the FC's recommendation of 41% tax devolution, yet another fiscal flashpoint brewing?
Yeah, Vijay, certainly the Finance Commission report, they have kept the share of states same as 41%. This is bound to get a strong reaction from the states, because some of them are demanding actually about a 50% share in the state. Yeah. So they would be. The other thing they would be looking at, besides the total share, is what is the kind of arrangement they are making for states which are performing better. Of course, there's a 2% things for performance also there, but they'll be clearly looking at what is it they're getting. The other thing is the devolution of grants. One has to really see whether it has actually gone up as compared to the previous 15th Finance Commission. There will be that number is not there, because the FC report has been submitted in the Parliament. One has to look into to see the details. But as a headline goes, I'm sure the states are going to react, especially some southern states are going to react on that. That's one. The other thing is, before the budget, we have discussed a few large issues. I think we have experts who should be answering all those. What is it? The biggest thing we are facing is, like TK did try to touch upon that, one of the biggest thing is how are we going to face the trade onslaught which is coming from US? Is there any provisions for that? Uh, what is that we are going to do once the agreement which Europe has been signed and which will be more or less finalized in the next 8 to 10 months? What kind of you know uh, facilitation we are doing to fix that? There seems a lot of little things, specific industry, which basically for manufacturing, in terms of also customs, simplification. Whether these are all aimed in total towards that, that's another question. Infrastructure overall expenditure has gone up by 1 lakh crores, which means they have sustained
That's right.
the infrastructure spend and increased it by 1 lakh crore. The other thing is the fiscal consolidation. She has continued on that path and reduced
Yeah.
it further and set a target. Not only achieved last year's B, but has set it up at 4.1.
4.3%.
4.3, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is really, like we discussed earlier, that one would have expected that she would actually expand the budget, allow more expenditure, and make some big moves. Overall, this seems they're trying to, it seems kind of a safe budget, not venturing out, not saying anything. It's surprising that there is no big, uh, kind of things which one would expect at this point of time. Like many people are saying, this is a reform movement. It's almost like 1991, where we had a huge crisis, and it seems that there will be no attempt to look at that kind of thing. The other thing again is election states, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. Again, one has to look into details, but there have been some announcements like you'll have a speed train, high speed train, mineral corridor for rare earth minerals, tourism, temple tourism, and also lots of things for health sector. Again, one has to go into details to understand this. What kind of things? I think specifically Andhra Pradesh, fisher folk would be happy because there is a uh, in custom duty they have been given a relaxation that they'd be really very happy with, because fish exports, especially shrimps and other things, are getting affected. So that could come their way. This I would like somebody to answer on this STT tax. The it's actually basically it's on FNOs, which is basically highly risky and largely done by institutional investors, and they have reacted. That's where the
Markets
uh,
have fallen.
market has really tanked by 2,000 points, and it doesn't concern probably uh, small investors in that sense. I
Retail
mean,
investors.
the clarification I would like to know. Uh, that's again option transaction. That again has been hiked. These two things have resulted in markets reacting. How it would also affect the FII inflows? That's another question. Yeah.
Okay. So let me take your trade question to Biswajit Dar, and sir, this particular budget was seen as that there could be some kind of a subtle messaging for Donald Trump. Everybody were expecting that can Nirmala Sitharaman tame Don Trump in the Oval Office, and that's been the focus of this budget. But do you see that happening in this budget speech?
No, I think again, I'm also particularly disappointed. Just not Donald Trump. PK mentioned about the global headwinds, and along with that, we are going big on all these FTAs now. Last year, and and then of course this year we signed 3 FTAs, and I think we have 22 FTAs. And the most disappointing part of these FTAs is that with all the major partners, our trade deficit has actually gone up. And the reason is that we have not been able to increase our manufacturing sector exports into these countries. Agriculture, most of these countries are are very conservative about opening up their agriculture. Even EU hasn't actually opened up its agriculture like we did. Uh, the problem is that our manufacturing sector is just going downhill. Now, again, it's amazing that in the last 12 years, the government has actually brought in three initiatives to revive the manufacturing sector. It started with Make in India, and then Make in India got lost, and then we had PLI. PLI is going nowhere except the mobile phones, and that is also for a specific reason. We know that why it's happened. And for all the major sectors where PLI fund was actually dished out, nothing has actually happened there. And now we have this whole bunch of other manufacturing sectors which will be handed out largest. Now there is no focus now, and that's the most disappointing part of the government strategy. Now we always say that when you have a program, you need to consolidate. You need to sort of build on a scheme or initiative that you have taken. Just look at the Chinese. The Chinese had sort of since they started opening up, they went in a very focused way in trying to develop the manufacturing sector. Now here is absolutely no design, no desire to actually get the manufacturing sector. And so the 12 years back, the target was to take the share of the manufacturing sector from about 17% to 24%. Now the manufacturing sector is languishing around 16, 17% and hasn't gone anywhere. So that's the thing. And with this kind of a manufacturing sector, and with all these FTAs that the government is now getting into, I don't think we can get our external sector in order. I think the external balance is completely going to go haywire. Now the other important thing is that, well, Nirmala Sitharaman is talking about all these high-tech and manufacturing sectors, and she's focusing on them. And what message does Piyush Goyal give after signing the EU-India FTA? He says that our big advantage is labor-intensive manufacturing sector. Now, I think the government needs to decide whether we want to get stuck in the low end of the International Division of Labor, the low-tech sectors, or we want to do something about it. So there is no sort of strategy. There is no clear pathway. The other thing that I want to really mention here is on the on the larger picture of the structural problem that we face on the demand side. Now, the government is quite aware of this, and I think one of you mentioned about the lack of private investment, private sector investment, and also I would also top it up by saying that foreign direct investment is leaving this country. If you look at the numbers, it's pretty embarrassing that the disinvestments have actually speeded up so much over the past few years. It's becoming embarrassment, and there is no attempt to understand why this is happening, the structural problem. Now,
the chief economic advisor says it's profit booking.
Yeah.
The chief economic advisor says it's profit booking. He says.
Yeah. No, profit booking for how long? It's been going on for the past 3-4 years. So how long will they do it? So I'm saying that it's the behaving. This is this ostrich-like attitude, not looking at the reality.
That's right.
Let me just finally talk about this GST thing. That the government did this GST reform. It's not reform. It was actually trying to bring demand in the economy by cutting down these rates. And there were these full-page ads saying that now just go and buy. Now people are not going to buy.
All right. There seems to be a tech glitch there.
The revenue numbers that we.
Okay. No, we don't seem to have this connection there. Okay, let me get in a quick a viewpoint from Vidya Mahambari on this. There hasn't been the government is not really there's no solid inkling that's coming in from the government to push manufacturing, is what he says. There's a bit of a confusion. There's a focus on high-end manufacturing or low-end manufacturing. How do you see this? Ms. Mahambari, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, I missed that you asked me.
Okay, so
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
please.
no, I heard your question. I didn't realize
Yeah,
you asked
sure.
me. Yes, low-end manufacturing or high-end manufacturing. I think for India now, manufacturing strategy has to be regional. There is no point having low-end manufacturing in relatively prosperous states, such as southern states, where the youth does not want to get employed in factories. That is the, that is the ground level reality. You have, given degrees, or you have encouraged people, youth, to take degree level education, including women. You can't force them back into labor factory and, sorry, leather and textiles and so on. Then you are reliant on migrants. And if you are reliant more on migrants, there is nothing about migrant housing, in prosperous states, especially family housing. So if you want to do manufacturing, it has to be relatively low-end manufacturing in the northern states, where there is large pool of relatively low-educated, unskilled labor, high-end manufacturing in prosperous states, simply by going. But I'm again saying there is a lot more talk in this budget about something called, also in addition to what I said on services, something like orange economy. They have talked about like gaming,
That's right.
creative services, some other services. There is employment, education to employment standing committee. They have a, specific target, 10% of global service output, I think, from India by certain year. So they are now much more focused, for me, clearly on services, perhaps because they have tried manufacturing. Manufacturing requires much more smoother infrastructure, physical infrastructure, requires much lower electricity cost, requires like labor market to be working much more flexibly, which they haven't been able to put in place now for several years. So for
Yeah.
me, it is an implicit move without saying that there is much more focus on tourism. So tourism, if you global tourism comes here, that is tourism exports for us,
Yeah.
right? So education 1.5, caregivers to be done by certain year. So whether non-tradable services, which is within India, there are no exports, but non-tradable services, education, healthcare, and so on, and tradable services such as GCCs, tourism, in general IT sector, lot more focus for me seems to be on that. Though of course we cannot give up on manufacturing, so they continue reforms on that, and there is mention of infrastructure and all. But as
That's
I
right.
agree, as the previous experts also have said, there is no coherent strategy where we can see manufacturing in India really flourish and become competitive.
Okay. Okay. I get your point. I want to bring in Dr. Jay Aswandi, who's been patiently waiting for that. So, Jay, I was expecting that there could be some kind of an announcement for cities. There's lots of pollution in Mumbai and Delhi, even in Bengaluru, where you operate out of. So, but there seems to be nothing in the budget. What's your take on the budget from a climate perspective?
Thank you, Vijay. As the token non-economist in this group, I would like to say a few things. So first of all, I think the budget started off very well in the sense of saying that as part of the first Kartavya, there was this whole idea about delivering a push to infrastructure, ensuring long-term energy security and stability, and the notion of developing city economic regions. I think those are 3 points of the six things that were talked about right at the beginning. And let's start with the first big one, right? Which to us was on the nuclear side, on the carbon capture and storage. That was related to climate. It is a long-term issue, and the amount of money that is being set aside is almost 20,000 crores over the next 5 years. And this is something that, in my view, is one of those long view items, right? In our modeling work, we see carbon capture and storage showing up only in the 2030s for India. So in some ways, it is something that's setting us up. Maybe we will not play catch up just like we've been playing in all other areas. That is one. The second one is on the issue around. I think there is, there's a continuation of the duties and the relaxation of duties on various manufacturing related stuff related to renewable energy, and again batteries also comes into that, and also on the import of rare earth materials, which is very essential to our renewable energy question. And so I think in that sense, but I think, one thing people need to understand, that this is not something where it's like a tap where you turn it on and turn it off at will, right? These are long-term investments that are needed. Let's talk about the nuclear part, right? Which is, again, they have extended the import duties. But the biggest announcement was actually the Shanti Bill. If you look at the Shanti Bill, it talked a lot more about what is needed in that area to get more people to come in. There is a sliding scale structure for the liabilities, which was earlier at a much higher level. Now there's a sliding scale. So, in some ways, I feel, I wonder whether we are starting to move to the notion of a developed modern economy where not everything is announced on February 1st, but things are done over an entire year period and we actually see things happening. So, in my view, the bigger challenge is going to be how do we implement some of these things. There was an announcement in there also about the cities being engines of growth, and that they will now focus on tier 2 and tier 3 cities. I think that's a wonderful idea, where they are going to allocate about 5,000 crores for city regions. Now, how is it spent? What is it spent on? As a climate person, as an environmental person, I would hope that they would start looking at issues around nature-based solutions, look at local innovations, local structures, rather than a one-size-fits-all that will deal with all the cities. And that will address a lot of the issues that have been spoken about so far on manufacturing. How do you set up these manufacturing units, which is, again, there was something around the manufacturing schemes that they wanted to put in place. I think there is the idea of MSMEs, creating champion MSMEs, I believe. So I think getting India to actually operate beyond the 4 cities, beyond the whatever 6 cities we talk about today, having a lot more tier 2, tier 3 cities participating in the global economy and in the local economy to a large extent, in my view, is the way to go. But we have to keep in mind sustainability at the fore. Not everything has to be about spend, not worrying about how we are spending it. It has to be sustainable. We have to think about that a little more and decide how we are going to spend these outlays that have been put forward.
That's right. Okay, let me take this, the champion MSMEs question to Mr. Kalayasan there. There's been a allocation of about 10,000 crore in about 5 years for the SME growth fund, as the finance minister calls it. Remember the MSMEs and the SMEs have been hit by, triple whammies, I call it, firstly by the demonetization, and later by the GST, and then by the COVID wave. And now we've got the Trump tariffs. Again, get to see here, inputs coming in from Tirupur and so on. That they certainly struggle. Those working in the textile industry, in the garment industry. How do you see the MSME emphasis on the budget?
Thanks, Vijay, for asking this question. It's a very important question. First, we need to know actually what is happening in MSME. What is the status? As you rightly mentioned that the impact of demonetization, GST, then COVID, then this tariff now. The tariff is actually really having a devastating effect on, particularly on garment industry, which we know by now, from if you talk to the entrepreneurs in Tirupur in particular. So now the question is in MSME, there are two things. One is the traditionally known, among the economies is a bunch of, argument, which is one of the top argument is the market, the credit question, credit access to the financial question. Then the second is the market, and the third is the other structural aspects. But I think I would say it has not fully recovered from the loss that they did witnessed from the last three. You mentioned the 3 shocks. And I think that needs to be clearly studied in thinking about going forward. I think that's still not fully, because even the recent data of the NSSO unincorporated survey, which allows some ways to estimate the number of firms lost in the last 10 years from 2015 to 23, 24. Almost in Tamil Nadu alone, some registered enterprises, some 50,000 enterprises are still not able to recover from this MSME shocks. I think on top of that, now the Trump tariff, definitely it is going to happen. So now I think solution that mentioned here, they think largely of the fixing financial solution alone of the credit. I think that's not really is the main, that is one of the definitely important question. But I think there are other questions, particularly technological upgradation. Our MSMEs are capable of enhancing their competitiveness by upgrading the technology in, say, if MSME is a way to, say, making a labor-intensive goods for exports with Europe. We are signing a European, so as Professor Vishwadev mentioned, that India signed 3 FTAs in recent time, particularly claiming that it's going to focus on labor-intensive goods. How our MSMEs are in a position to produce in a competitive terms of those goods that is exportable to Europe? Is the question. Do you have that technology? fast. Why this technology again is an important question, because unlike if you say follow the other strategies, other countries' experience, particularly Chinese experience, the way in which MSME integrated with the larger ecosystem, larger firms, I don't think that our MSME is very much integrated with the larger ecosystems where, I mean, larger firms where the technology can be diffused. This is one of the things that, the technology can be diffused through engaging firm engagement from the small to the large. I don't think that we have been able to make progress on that, particularly the technology, know that other skills. One way that some of this MSME, I mean, there is a focus in this budget, particularly the cluster, industrial cluster, which is something after a long time I see in a budget. That's what I don't know what it means clearly. What is that when they mention that they're going to focus on industrial clusters, which is definitely one way of thinking about MSMEs. For instance, the successful MSMEs. If you look at the successful MSMEs, what are the pathways in which one can see the success out there? It's partly of the what do you call the agglomeration of externalities and the state level support, as Dr. Vidya mentioned, particularly the regional focus. There are certain state governments and which actually had a huge focus on those clusters. I think that needs to be done. I think it's like just in a macro level, putting some schemes, say credit enhancement or other schemes. I'm not sure fully unless it clearly works with states. Even I would go to the extent of saying I think the central government should, the union government should leave this business of MSMEs to the states and make those aspects incentive, in the sense make the states which deliver on MSMEs, they would be incentivized in the financial allocation via fiscal transfer, fiscal federalism. Because one size fits strategy doesn't work in India for MSMEs. MSMEs are a regional focused, territorially focused, and there's an advantage that being in territorial and regionally focused. I think that, in fact, sometimes I feel that it's better to leave to the states and incentivize the states to deliver on those MSMEs, or you have a policy where you can actually get the states on board to make before any claims on MSMEs. Otherwise, it's just going to be a claim, and I don't think we're going to progress on that. Yeah.
Okay, let me bring that point and get a quick take from Srinivasan sir on that. Would you think MSMEs, the center should leave MSMEs to the states and let the states make the decisions on that, so that's better, because in terms of productivity, the government is also focusing a lot on MSMEs. We saw the same kind of announcement in the last budget as well. We don't really know what exactly has transpired, but maybe the finance ministry, Nirmala Sitharaman, has lost a hope where in terms of private investment from the corporates. Maybe she's now focusing on MSMEs as power engines.
You see, I would like to go into the details, but I think in this budget, she has made some provisions for purchase of capital goods specifically for MSMEs, which can be imported from, say, European countries for improvement of the technology. I think she has mentioned it. How much of that is practically possible? How much of that actually happens is a question. The other biggest issue MSMEs have been facing is access to finance. They've been constantly complaining that they have not been getting, besides technology, that they have been not getting adequate finance. And that detail, one has to see whether that facility is given to them. The other announcement made for MSMEs is some equity growth fund, 10,000 crores, which has been allotted. And the other one is there is some self-reliant India fund. But the question is, again, then there is a liquidity support, which they have said. Like I mentioned earlier, MSMEs always complain about lack of liquidity. There are 3 of 4 or 5 announcements made. Whether they actually, these things, how they're going to be implemented, how they translate, that's to be seen. But largely, this is what the MSME announcements in the budget been. So my take was, when I was hearing that, I thought probably they want to strengthen these MSMEs more, keeping in mind the exports which they need to make to European countries and other openings which they got through FTA. That's what I understood. But one question I still want to know, I think Kalayaarasan is the best to answer that, this whole federal issue and how they are dealing with this finance commission. Because the devolution is same at 41, and how much of that has been given to, there is a mention that, even as Jay said earlier, we need to improve urban, civic infrastructure in tier 2 and 3 city, and that's been a major problem, which you see during floods and other natural calamities. Now here that allocation, so this Finance Commission 16 in terms of reference also spoke about making some of these transfers at tertiary level, because states don't transfer to local bodies. The complaint which they keep making at a national level, they also don't seem to be transferring adequately to the local bodies, except some state. I think Kerala does it very well. Tamil Nadu does it, but I don't think it's to the level which is required. So the question is, how much of this, if it is kept at the same 41%, within that, the grants to the local bodies, local urban and rural bodies, how much it's going to? Those details are not known. But what is his overall impression on that?
Yeah, thanks, Sri. I think there's one problem here. I think it's not much discussed in detail of this 41%. Effectively, it starts from 14th Finance Commission, which recommended 42% of the total allocation has to go to states, which is, I think, is historical, break from the earlier Finance Commission resolutions. Distributions. So this 41%, 42% actually in practice not been implemented. In fact, if you see the effective transfer, in fact, it has come down today. It's 33%, not even 41. It's 33% today. So why this is? In fact, it's peaked at one. See, starting from say 2015 to 2025, 26. 24, 25. It's only 1 year. It's peaked to 35%, 36%. So it has been around 33, 34, around that stage. It's not never reached 42 as per the original the calculation, because the 14th said that for 42%, and the 15th Finance Commission also said 42% continued, and the later even 16th, 41% now we have, as you mentioned rightly, but we've not been. So why this is happening? Partly two reasons. One, there is something called this is the transfer actually largely to do with the divisible pool. But the center has been doing what they cleverly has been doing is something called non-divisible, which is sort of cesses and other aspects, which has been raising phenomenally over a period of time. So therefore, what is rightfully entitled with the states actually been taken away from the other door, back door. So which is partly a reason why this the share has been declining for effective share. Although paper it is 41%, but in effective share it has been declining. One. The second, which is more important, as initially Dr. D.K. Arun mentioned, that the center also has been doing something what we call of encroaching what otherwise the state subjects of the schemes, which is partly weakening the center ability itself on do things what it's rightly expected to do of what you call through the centrally sponsored scheme has been encroaching on the state, and through which there's been some transfer to the states. Because the center, when you have schemes which are operating within the state, obviously the money flows from the center to states, but not via this mechanism. But that is again weakening the center's ability to invest in other productive ways. Instead of that doing that, it actually spends money on the schemes which are rightfully what falls under the state list or the concurrent list largely. So I think there's two reasons why the fiscal federalism has been under very fragile or most contested thing. One, so this is in terms of aggregate. There is also much more, which is I think I would say is not just about the vertical. So far we've been discussing about the vertical imbalance between the center and states. There is also a problem within the horizontal transfer, what you call horizontal equity within the states. So the southern states claim is also not just the size of the total transfer from center to states, it is also the distribution of those within the states, those transferred within the states, which is again the question of, we'll end up discussing about the north-south, particularly developed states versus the developing states, because I think if I'm right, the 16th Finance Commission continues to have the same formula of 45% of weight for the per capita income, which effectively means the poorer the states, the larger their share would be in the fiscal transfer. I think if you continue, that is also I think going to be, which we can discuss. That's also going to be most contentious. That is what the most of the southern state has been questioning, because they give X number of rupees in terms of taxes, and they get it in return. Part of it much lower share of what they pay through the taxes. I think that's something we can discuss. But more contentious issues is Even the effective transfer of that 41% that is rightfully recommended has not been reaching the states. It is actually much lower because of the other mechanisms. Yeah.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. TK Arun, and I've got, I also, before we talk about consumption, we spoke about consumption extensively on the pre-budget panel discussion. But before that, I want to quickly, get your take on the semiconductor mission that's been put out. It's been semiconductor mission 2.0. Nirmala Sitharaman says, there's been allocation of about 40,000 crore on that. The first semiconductor journey started off in 2021. With an approved incentive of about 76,000 crore. Then I think, garnered about 10 major projects for India, in terms of, wafer fabrication, and compound semiconductor manufacturing. Although India also plays a pivotal role in terms of its designing there. So how do you see the center's approach as far as the semiconductor, are concerned?
In my view on the standard strategy on semiconductors is a little different from the conventional. Why do we want to manufacture semiconductors in India? It's only if there is a strategic threat of semiconductors being withheld from India for any strategic reasons. Suppose a Trump administration or another xenophobic administration says India cannot be given access to advanced technology, any equipment that embodies advanced American technology, including semiconductors. It is to cover this kind of a contingency we need to manufacture semiconductors in India, which means we should be in a position to manufacture semiconductors indigenously in India, the entire ecosystem, which is what China has been forced to do thanks to Trump 1's export bans and subsequent actions. Now they are today able to manufacture fairly advanced, at least 7 nanometer chips in China using China's own equipment. They have created everything, including the these ultraviolet laser etching machines, which are used to engrave the grooves on silicon chips, into which vaporized copper is deposited to create the extremely thin circuit. You need lenses which can actually focus a laser onto these on the silicon wafers. They have developed that. You need material to clean these wafers once it is in deposited. Which is what Tokyo Electron supplies. But China has developed their own capability. What India needs to do is to develop this entire ecosystem by funding startups to do this. We give subsidy of foreign companies to set up shop here. For why? What do we gain? We can purchase these mass-produced items from abroad without any problem. The only reason to spend money on indigenous capability is to insulate ourselves from possibility of technology denial in case of any strategic threat. That we are not attempting at all. We are producing some 22 nanometer chips, which can use for refrigerators or washing machines or automobiles. Why? We can just buy them. The most advanced chips we require, our semiconductor missions do not address acquiring this strategic autonomy perspective capability in supplying our own chips. So this is all nonsense. It is going nowhere. We are just wasting money, giving scarce resources to foreign companies as subsidy instead of giving it to our own startups to develop this ecosystem. If Chinese engineers can do it, why can't we develop our own? India's engineering talent is being hired by global capability centers to develop intellectual property for foreign companies. 1,800 of them. One company alone employs 60,000 people. Our best talent, not fresh graduates. They are luring people away from other tech companies. They are being deployed to advance the capability, intellectual property of Western companies. Why don't our companies do it? Our companies won't do it. That's true. They don't have a culture of investing in R&D. Our R&D as a proportion of GDP is 0.64%. They won't do it. But at least our startups can. So the government should fund them. They are not doing that. So that is with regard to semiconductor. I just want to make 2-3 points on SMEs. While actual physical support of SMEs can be done by state governments, the macro policy that determines the cost of capital for SMEs, the threat from external trade, the exchange rate, all these are determined by macro level policies at the center government, not at the state level, right? And for that, the center must have a vision. And Now, in the context of artificial intelligence and advance in robotics, what are the so-called labor-intensive industries that will survive? So far, machines have not been able to cut fabric. You can stitch them, but machines cannot cut fabrics. Now that capability is being developed. You have robots who can actually pick up something as delicate as an egg without breaking it. They can measure things, they can cut things. So we must future-proof our industry. Instead of just saying that we continue with the same old labor-intensive industry, they will not exist. There are 450 million, 4.5 million industrial robots deployed in the world, half of them in China. Where are we? So there has to be a policy to see how AI is being incorporated into physical machinery, robots, and replacing labor and a potential to do that in different sectors. Can diamonds be polished by machines, by robots? Can we continue to rely on our gem and polishing industry surviving just because it's labor intensive? The most sophisticated things, yes, specialist things might still survive, but mass cutting and polishing, it will be automated. So this kind of a vision must come from the center, and we must equip our industry to handle this. That's not being done. The only good thing for SMSE, they said, is they strengthened the TREDS scheme, trade-related electronic discounting scheme, where the factoring will take place electronically, and making them tradable commodities. That's all good. But however, it is not enough for public sector units to do this. Half the private sector companies, they never pay their creditors, their what the money they owe small scale industry in time. They are delayed for 50 days, 60 days, and so on and so forth. And the only way the MSMEs can get their credit cheap is your functional debt market. At least NBFCs will be able to raise debt, and for that we should allow subprime debt. We should allow high risk debt to be floated with an appropriately high rate of interest. So NBFCs that lend to risky small companies, they should be able to raise money at, say, at 14%. And they will not be rated what is today considered investment grade. They will be considered subprime. But so what? There will be any number of funds which are willing to take a bet, take a risk, and invest in these bonds because they get a higher return. That money then will be utilized by these NBFCs to lend to MSMEs at a rate which are far cheaper than the informal sources from which they currently borrow money. Instead of doing that, we are saying that we will do some tinkering with debt market. The primary thing holding back India's debt market is that government bonds and corporate debt market, they are two separate segments. Government bonds are controlled with RBI and not allowed to be controlled by SEBI. That must go. That's the first primary step. Then the rest of it can actually take place. Third thing, and it's just the last point before I leave. On the municipal bond, it's great to talk about municipal bonds, but what is the fiscal capacity that the municipalities have? How will they service these loans? Suppose they issue 100 crore debt. How will they do it? How will they service that debt? What resource base do they have? They are reliant on handouts by the state government. So unless municipalities have clearly defined areas where they can mobilize resources, say like property tax, that should be clearly their area. Some state governments actually take over property tax rules. That must be left to cities, and cities must tax property properly. Those who gain high capital gains in their real estate, they should be willing to pay a sufficient amount of property tax, and that should be leveraged by municipalities to raise money and invest in their facilities. And that is, again, we are not addressing. So
1 minute, Vijay.
Yeah.
Before TK goes, I hope TK you completed.
No, tell me.
Continue.
No, tell me.
No, so the point I want to make is, all the stirring comments which is coming from you, the basic problem here is the politics. See, though we understand this is a right-wing government, but that applies not to economic issues. See, the moment they say that, look, we're going to, feed lots of robots, the immediate question will be job loss, and then social, those kind of issues. So
Yeah,
even when
exactly.
for
So
a
I'm not
long
saying
time
that we should deploy our work.
Indian government was not willing for a very long time. They were not willing to use the word privatization. They use all kinds of convoluted words, the private participation, so circumvent all that. So I think even when he comes back, when the trade minister also talks, he talks of labor intensive. So that's I think the legacy still continues, and the kind of bold things which is required, at least at this juncture, which is a huge crisis, I don't think that's what it is coming. And the disappointment is even in the defense sector, which is actually nationalist forever, nationalist government. Even there, I think is falling short. Perhaps that's what I glean from your comments. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, yeah. No, fully agreeing with you on this. I'm not saying that we should go robotic. I'm saying these industries will be robotized, automated, and they needn't be performed in India once they're robotized. So we need to prepare our small scale industry for that. Acha, and last point, I need to leave. Uh,
Yeah, please, sir. Go ahead,
so
sir. Yeah.
the only heartwarming thing for me in the budget is the recognition of the need to have carbon capture and use. I'm not in favor of carbon capture for storage. You need to be able to use the carbon you capture. You need to invest in R&D. See, in the lab, in university labs, they have been able to convert captured carbon dioxide into pure carbon, graphene, and other things like ammonia or something like that. Now, you in India, we have a completely stupid policy on energy. We are importing LNG at $10-15 per MMBtu. We cannot afford to do that. With 20,000 megawatt of gas-based power plant capacity is stranded, not being utilized, not being run because gas is too expensive. The gas produced from such expensive fuel cannot be consumed by people. So, whereas we have underground coal, that coal should be gasified and the gas should be burned to generate power. Instead of doing, if you do that, if we still want to meet our carbon commitments, we need to have a coherent strategy of capturing that carbon dioxide generated by burning gas, and we need to invest in R&D to make this a reality. So, to the extent some money is being provided for that, I am very happy. I hope
Okay.
that will lead to us a coherent follow-up strategy on other sectors. I have to
I
take
think
my leave.
yeah, sure.
Thank you.
One second, sir. I think Jay can answer that question. Jay, would you like to take that?
So I think there's not much to answer there. I think he's made a very hopeful statement, and I'm glad also that money has been put aside. The only thing I'd like to point out is that the amount of utilization that we can do from all the carbon that we capture is a very small fraction of the whole amount of carbon we are going to capture. So the utilization will be far smaller. I mean, we are talking about orders of magnitude smaller. So we do have to think about how we will store it if we want to go down that path, right? Assuming that we continue to go down that path, we will need to figure out how to store it. The good news is that we do have some time to figure that out. It's not like we need to do it tomorrow. We have to do it within the next decade. And I think that is the timeline that maybe this amount of money will be useful for us to figure out this in that period of time.
Okay.
No, I
But
just,
yeah.
please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. No, I just had a follow-up question to Jay. Jay, the point with the India's, climate strategy, I believe, is, initially we were focusing about, we had policies like, the solar energy, mission Suryodaya, and so on and so forth. And we had this, something to the power hydroelectric and so on, largely renewables, high-end renewables, right? So now, we're now moving into the carbon capture wasn't really a topic that India was discussing, a couple of years back. And then now we're moving into nuclear. I read the report last year's budget as well. We do discuss about the nuclear energy, how expensive it is, and all that. So, do you think India still doesn't have the proper solid climate strategy yet?
So the strategy is fairly simple, right? It's based on the commitments that we have made to unite the UN
2017.
UNFCCC, and the idea is essentially that we will start to limit our fossil fuel consumption, and we will get to a net zero point by 2070.
That's right.
Now, as far as the perspective on reducing the amount of fossil energy being used as a fraction is coming down, and that is, I think that there is, the point is that you cannot throw all your eggs into one basket, right? There is solar, there's wind, but nuclear also forms a part of that strategy, because what you will realize is that power has to be provided to people at the time of requirement. It's no point in me telling you that I provided you power at 8 a.m., but you needed it at 8 p.m. That's not useful. On the other hand, a liter of water, if I provided it to you at 8 a.m., you will figure out a way to store it and keep it and be able to consume it at 8 p.m., which is where the whole batteries things comes in. And that is another aspect that has been brought to light. That is, we'll have to think about all these strategies on storage. Again, the hydro part that you talked about, again, pump storage is an option, but you'll see that progressively we will have to figure out an entire perspective or a gamut of things that we can do, and it's a portfolio of things. We
That's
also
right.
realize that there'll be certain industries that will be very hard to decarbonize, right? Like cement, iron, and steel. In cement, you have process emissions. So in also steel, you'll have process emissions. What do you do with that carbon dioxide? And that's where the carbon capture and utilization and storage will be an option for us. We are still a growing economy. That is one thing that people need to realize. We do not have the same challenges like the West, where they just need to say, okay, what do we need to move from carbon to non-carbon? For us, it is also about the growth. So the question is, how do we maximize the amount of renewables that we use as we move towards the per capita energy consumption that most developed nations have? And that is the path that we are going towards. And it seems inevitable. The question becomes, how do we do it in a manner that is where we get the most bang for the buck? As they say, GDP per unit of energy. If we can reduce the amount of energy used per GDP dollar or GDP rupee that we produce, then we are moving in that direction. We do not need to make the mistakes of other countries, right? We can chart our own way into this.
Yeah.
Okay, I think Mr. Kalayasan wanted to.
No, I
Yeah,
just
Mr.
want not. I,
Have to leave. Can I make two short points?
Absolutely, sir. Please go ahead, sir. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just two short points because I have another commitment. Sorry. Yeah. No, I think in these discussions on MSME, I think I've never liked the word the acronym MSME, because SMEs are in one basket, the M's are in other basket. The micro have a completely different thing. I think the first thing that we should talk about now is to delink SMEs from the micro enterprises are really the basket cases and where all the employment lies. 99% of MSME employment is in micro, and the micro guys are actually having a huge mountain to climb, and there is no one looking at it. The finance minister talks about credit being given to MSMEs. The micro enterprises don't go to the formal sector. I think TK was mentioning about it. They don't go to the formal sector. They are all into the informal money market. Yeah, and we haven't been able to solve that problem. So unless you do this, then all these things about giving adequate income to people just goes out of the window. And then we are stuck in this situation that I talked about, that you can't raise demand unless you have people sitting out there not earning enough. And extending that same logic is agriculture. I was extremely disappointed that agriculture got virtually nothing. This is a sector which is stuck in a crisis for as long as we know. And you can't negotiate trade agreements. You can't actually get your global integration right because the agriculture sector can't be opened up, and you are looking at prospects of farmers losing their livelihoods and food security and all that you have. Now, I can't understand why this government, and the Prime Minister made a big statement in the Independence Day speech that we're going to protect the interests of farmers. Now, you're going to just protect the interests of farmers by having higher tariffs, but not looking at their productivity, not investing in rural infrastructure, not allowing the farmers to earn the right or get the right prices for their produce. So the entire agriculture sector is full of all kinds of problems, infrastructure failure, and a huge market failure because the farmers are really in the hands of the middlemen. Who's going to answer that question? And the final thing is that, look, I think Jay said that we are we're moving into like a developed country. Not everything is going to be answered in the budget. Fine, But where are we going to ask those big questions? Where is this thing? After the planning commission was kicked out, the budget is the only document that is presented by the government where there is a roadmap, where there's a medium-term roadmap. There is nothing else. And if the medium-term roadmap coming from the union budget is all messed up, like we discussed, that manufacturing sector design is all mucked up. We don't know whether we want to promote the service sector or the manufacturing sector, and we don't look at agricultural sector. Where is this economy going to go? And how are you going to create jobs? How are you going to create incomes, most importantly? So just on that note, I just have to have another commitment. I'm very sorry about that.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. Okay, so
I just made
please,
one
I have
point.
a
Maybe
question for you, sir. I have a question for
yeah.
you, sir. We in the pre-budget panel discussion, we talked much about consumption. Last year's budget was also, the biggest theme was consumption. There's 1 lakh crore of tax. Government had to forego 1 lakh crore of tax. But and then we had the GST bonanza as well that just came in during Diwali. So now there is no talks about consumption there, because the consumption has risen over 60%. It was 56.6% in the last year. The annual economic survey had pointed out. Do you think the government is convinced with these numbers?
Yeah, before I go there of the consumption and demand connection, I wanted to.
Sure, you're on mute. Kalayarsan.
No, before I go,
Please go ahead.
Aggregate demand and the consumption matter, I wanted to discuss this question in a response to the SME and MSME question while TK and Mr. Vijay were talking. I think they got one thing wrong, which I wanted to contest that in the panel and the factual numbers. There's a misconception about the MSME and the trade. Let me give you the numbers today. 24-25, the total export basket, the labor intensive good, you take the sector of leather and leather products and the textile and the ready-made garments, all put together, not more than 5% of the total our export. So we are not, as of now, exporting any labor-intensive goods in terms of value. If you look at the total share in our export basket, it's a misconception that we think that because of having a macro-level policy would actually change the labor-intensive goods or labor-intensive industry dimension. It's something requires a completely different understanding of the MSME. I'm talking about the total mercantile basket today of the share of. Even if you look at the growth, what are the sectors that have grown last 15 years, starting from 2008? It is electronics, chemicals, and agriculture. Interestingly, agriculture is like a third or fourth actually. So these are not any engineering goods, not any labor-intensive good as we think of, which actually directly link with our manufacturing or export basket. So today, therefore, our export strategy, of course, is now been trying to be linked with our manufacturing, but I think there's two different questions. One, the second, what we export, our current account deficit is not necessarily coming from, we are importing some sophisticated goods from say China and other. China is one of the trade partners in terms of the mercantile goods. Actually, we are importing 200 rupee shirts. We are importing pens and pencils, small stuff, which otherwise we could have been able to do within our MSMEs. So it's not about we are importing some sophisticated goods where it requires a lot of technology or AI that's going to change the MSME. No, actually we are importing goods which could easily be producible for our own domestic consumption, given our population size in the country. So that's a question that I wanted to mention. I think both left. This is some misconception about the MSME and the trade. How much the MSME is competitive? No, actually we don't do that. In fact, if you look at our basket of mercantile goods, this is a misconception that they were having. So that's a point. So with respect to the consumption and the aggregate demand, I think after having done that tax reform in last year of the income tax, which would have the assumption was enhancing the disposable income in hands. The second strategy of cutting down the GST, which again would have enhanced the disposable income. I think the government, for my readings, seems to be convinced it solved the problem of consumption, which is an important component of the demand constraint. Today the consumption share is some 61.5% or something, if I'm right correctly from the economic survey, which is little marginally higher than what it was. I think the problem, the budget, the government seems to have decided that it has solved the problem of the consumption demand problem, which is via reforming the last year the income tax and the reduction in the restructuring the GST, I think it solved the problem. I think that my problem, I think it's the most important problem is the questions why private investment is not picking up. That's, I think, is a question that we should be again and again asking. It is also a question of demand constraint. It is not when we think of, we often think the demand constraint problem is with only consumption. No, it is also demand, but the investment not picking up is also, this is an age-old Keynesian question that, by doing some change in the capital reform, reform in the capital sector, we can enhance the investment. That is an old supply side strategy, which Keynesians actually in the macroeconomic logic contest that it is a real economic problem. There is something that the private investors are wary of, which could be the uncertainty, it could be the global uncertainty because of the changes, or it could be the domestic incentive pattern. We don't know. That is a question that the government should be worried about, of why the private investment is not picking despite so many reforms that we have been witnessing. We are not even facing the problem of twin balance sheet problem that we had in 2014, 2013. That was the main reason for a long time. It's given the private investors are not confident. There is a, NPA and all that. Those problems are cleared now. But there is something else fundamentally holding the companies not investing. Why is the question? That's something we need to. It's not the question of consumption now. I think it's a question of investment. Why it is not taking up? Again, the problem is not in the capital market. I think the problem is somewhere in the real economy. That is to be thought about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Point taken, sir.
1 minute. Why it's not consumption issue? Because the capacity of most of the thing are only
It's
about
somewhere in the mid-70s, yeah.
It is and consumption.
Why would they invest?
No,
when
why I
they
say
have
the
to
consumption issue in the sense, consumption issue indirectly linked in the sense. It's obviously, initially it was thought even if, say, a consumer issue comes when your purchasing power is low, the population, which is purchasing power. How do you enhance your purchasing power? You put one way of doing is, you can do that. How do you enhance the consumption problem, purchasing power? Either change the tax structure, which enhances your disposable income. You did with the direct tax, you did it with indirect tax. Or then if you have a rural demand is really shrinking, that you put money in NRGA and enhance the rural purchasing power in hands of people. So now I think there's some there's some attempt on that. Or really work on the longer term structural reform question of enhancing the earnings of the wages, which could be, if you think that wages has not been, earning as much, not growing as much as your per capita income, which we don't know actually, but it's stagnant, but definitely not declining. So I think the question is why I say is the share of, if you look at the share of our consumption in total GDP, it's 61.5%. I think it was not more, when was that? It was more than that in historical time.
Okay. Closing remarks, guest.
But whereas investment has definitely been lower than what it was. If I'm right, the peak rate of the investment is 36% or something in 2005. I don't know whether 2008. I have to check the numbers actually. When was the peak? Yeah. But still, we have not reached that old investment rate. There's a fantastic paper by R. Nagaraj, IDR, actually why investment is not picking up in this country. There's a fundamental reason that he articulates that in that. That's why I say the consumer, it's an investment problem. Why investment is not picking? Of course, consumer is there in the back of it. There is a long link of that. Yeah.
Sure. We got two more questions. We'll meet again with Talking Sense with Chini in just about 2 hours.
Of course,
Vijay Mahambare, hits and misses, or what do you see? Hits and misses. Quick comments, ma'am.
Yeah. I think hits, I will go back to, the increasing emphasis on services, and that is inevitable. It is an essentially underlying admission that when I was in my previous job, which is 15 years ago, just now what was said, that is same, it was true that we do not export labor intensive manufacturing that much at all, right? Mm-hmm. So, and after 15 years, nothing much has changed. So clearly it is a move. Why not investment? Any firms will invest if they can see future profits, right? Future returns. So that for them, the demand comes from either the domestic consumption or from the exports. On export side, we know the uncertainty. On the domestic side, there has to be a lot more, earnings growth, which is not there. So, it is not difficult to see why people are not investing, because investment is not reversible in many cases. So you get simply stuck. So for me, it is essentially a move towards lot more services, lot more non-tradable services, and perhaps the export services from manufacturing. That's how it looks like. We didn't talk about, of course, the gross market borrowings being very high, but I think RBI will manage that with some sort of buyback or switches, so that pressure may be lower. They have also assumed, I think, 10% nominal GDP growth, which was last year 8%. So with the 10%, they have the tax numbers, which the tax policy which they have assumed. So we'll have to see how how it goes on that front as well.
Thank you very much. Mama, final comments, Srinivas, sir, before we wrap this up. Hits and misses of 2026 Nirmala's budget speech. You're on mute right now, sir.
One of the thing everybody was looking for is this question which we discussed right away with these economists is how to boost private investment. Whether we got a clear-cut answer to that, it's still a big question. As far as consumption is concerned, again, the view is that, okay, other steps have been taken off. Now it is for the consumers to start purchasing, which is not happening. The other is, of course, the big miss is the defense budget. One would have expected far more robust, kind of spending plans, or at least, if not spending, at least the government could have come out with a kind of, if not here in the budget, they can't, but any indication that they want to procure more from the, private companies. Of course, that industry is growing, but they would looking forward to get more answers there. The other is infrastructure push. This government has been constantly talking about it, but they have maintained it. But I wish they could have actually provided more funds other than 1 lakh crores by actually, expanding the budget a bit by not going so much for fiscal consolidation. Overall, I feel that this budget, it seems almost the 9th budget of Nirmala Sitharaman. Is it she got a bit ran out of steam here because of all the details she has given, but no big points here, no big message. But overall, she has actually tried to plug in. It seems that the focus of the the budget from giving large vision and all, more about nut and bolts and how to, fix the economy through various gaps it has. I think that's what the budget has attempted this time.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Well, it's been no less riveting talking to each of those experts. We'll meet again very soon on Talking Sense of Tree in just about 2 hours. Thank you very much, viewers.